The air inside the beige conference room of Oak Ridge Advisory always smelled of stale paper, lukewarm coffee, and corporate desperation. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of quiet day where the clock seems to actively tick backward. I sat in a plastic chair in the far corner of the room, away from the glossy mahogany table where the leadership sat. I am Donald Cooper. I am 55 years old. I have a graying beard, a quiet voice, and a face that people tend to forget 5 seconds after they look at it. My job title was Senior Systems Compliance Analyst. It is the kind of title that makes people glaze over at dinner parties, but in reality, it meant I was the mechanic who kept the entire machine running while everyone else sat in the driver's seat. I had spent 4 years of my life at this firm, working in the shadows, fixing database errors, and ensuring our client deliverables were flawless. On this particular afternoon, I was not here to discuss work. I was here for what our supervisor, Peter Vance, had called a mandatory team alignment and collaboration assessment. In reality, it was a public execution. At the head of the table stood Beatrice Cole, our project manager. She held a thick stack of printed papers, cleared her throat, and looked at me with a cold, triumphant smile. She announced that the team had spent the last month documenting my behavior and had compiled a detailed list of 190 specific reasons why I did not belong at the company. It was a coordinated character assassination disguised as constructive feedback. Beatrice began reading the list. Her voice was clear, carrying the enthusiasm of someone who had just won the lottery. Reason number 1, arrives at work before anyone else, making colleagues feel guilty about their own schedules. Reason number 12, never participates in office discussions about television shows or popular culture. Reason number 38, never laughs at supervisor Peter Vance's jokes during department meetings. Reason number 47, leaves the office at exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon, regardless of outstanding team tasks. Reason number 92, prefers email communication over face-to-face conversation. Reason number 156, brings lunch from home instead of ordering with the team. Reason number 190, makes a weird humming sound when reviewing database files. I sat there in silence, my hands folded on my lap. I did not interrupt, I did not make excuses, and I did not show any emotion. I watched Peter Vance nod along with every reason Beatrice read, his fingers tapping a rhythmic beat on his notepad, as if he were conducting a symphony of my destruction. The other 21 analysts and project assistants stared at me, their faces blank, waiting for me to break down, raise my voice, or storm out of the room. They wanted tears or anger. They wanted to justify the cruelty they had committed. But there was something they did not know. 3 days earlier, my phone had rung. It was Beverly Cross, the managing partner at Vanguard Partners, Oak Ridge's biggest competitor. Beverly told me they had tracked my work for a year. They knew I was the one keeping Oak Ridge's largest account stable, and she offered me a senior position with a signing bonus of $250,000. I did not accept immediately, because some part of me still believed in loyalty. But as I sat in that conference room listening to Beatrice read reason number 190, that belief died a quiet death. I realized my loyalty was just a weakness they exploited. They did not want me to improve. They wanted me to feel small so they could keep taking credit for my work while keeping me under their thumb. Beatrice finished reading the final reason, let out a long breath, and placed the papers on the table. The silence in the room was heavy and suffocating. Every eye was locked on me, waiting for my reaction. I stood up slowly. I smoothed my navy jacket and adjusted my glasses. I looked around the table, meeting the gaze of every person who had contributed to that list. Then I said 5 words. Thank you for the feedback. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the number I had memorized. I pressed the speaker button so the entire room could hear the line ring. It rang twice before Beverly Cross answered. "Donald," she said, her voice warm. "I hope you have good news for me." I looked directly at Peter Vance as I spoke. "Hello, Beverly," I said. "I am ready to accept your offer. Yes, the signing bonus of $250,000 is perfectly fine. I can start on Monday morning." The silence was sudden and absolute. Beatrice Cole dropped her pen, which clattered loudly against the floor. Peter Vance's face went from bright red to ghostly white, his mouth open in shock. The other analysts sat frozen, staring at me. I could hear Beverly laughing on the speaker. "Excellent, Donald," she said. "We are thrilled. We will see you on the 15th floor on Monday." I ended the call, slipped the phone away, gathered my notepad, and walked out. I had spent 4 years being invisible, but as I left, I had never felt more seen. To understand why 23 people would spend a month building a list of 190 reasons to fire a senior analyst, you have to understand the business we were in. Oak Ridge Advisory was held together by duct tape and luck. The firm had originally been called Redwood Consulting, a small, respectable outfit founded by two veteran database engineers who valued technical precision and client satisfaction above all else. They built the firm on a reputation of absolute reliability. But after they retired 4 years ago, Redwood was swallowed by a private equity group that renamed the company Oak Ridge Advisory, and the culture shifted from client delivery to corporate politics. I was 51 years old when the merger occurred, and I quickly realized that the new management did not care about the technical details of systems compliance. They cared about presentations, corporate buzzwords, and looking important. The offices were renovated with glass walls and motivational slogans, and they replaced our functional oak desks with standing desks and colored beanbags to make it look tech-friendly. But the core database architectures were left to rot. They even cut our server maintenance budget to increase the marketing spend. Peter Vance was the prime example of this new breed. He was 35 years old, wore expensive suits, and could talk for hours without saying anything of substance. He was my direct supervisor, but he had no understanding of the database networks we managed. 3 years ago, our biggest client, Apex Manufacturing, was ready to terminate their contract because our quarterly compliance reports were consistently late and filled with errors. The transaction logs were dropping packets, and the quarterly reconciliation was failing. Peter was in a panic, unable to find the root cause. I stayed in the office for 3 nights, eating cold pizza, and wrote an automated validation script in Python that parsed the logs and matched the transactions. I left the solution on Peter's desk with a simple note explaining how to run it. The next morning, Peter presented my work to the executive board as his own. He saved the client, received a major promotion, and became my supervisor. I did not complain. I thought that as long as I did my job well, my value would be obvious. I was wrong. In the corporate world, if you do not claim credit for your work, someone else will, and they will eventually resent you for being the one who actually knows how to do it. Peter knew he was dependent on me. Every time a database crashed, every time a client asked a difficult technical question, he came to my cubicle. But instead of showing gratitude, he began to treat me as a threat. He and Beatrice Cole, the project manager who rose by organizing team-building retreats and designing colorful slides, began quietly building a case against me. They started excluding me from client meetings, claiming that my technical focus might confuse the clients. They scheduled important department discussions during my lunch hour, then acted surprised when I was not present. Beatrice started assigning me tasks with impossible deadlines, hoping I would fail, but I simply worked faster and cleaner. A new hire named Zachary Ward, who was 26 and spent more time networking than working, made jokes about how I probably lived in the office because I was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. The irony was that Zachary was struggling to understand the basic database schema, and I spent hours walking him through the code so he would not ruin our deliverables. The real turning point came 6 months ago. My phone rang on a rainy Tuesday evening while I was finishing an audit. The caller was Beverly Cross from Vanguard Partners. "Donald," she said, "we have been tracking the operational success of Oak Ridge Advisory for the past 2 years. We notice that every time a major technical milestone is reached, your name is on the version control log. We know you are the backbone of their systems division. We want to offer you a role as Senior Director of Client Relations." The offer was staggering: triple my current salary, a dedicated analyst team, and a signing bonus of $250,000. I told Beverly I needed time to think. I was loyal to the clients I had served, especially Lawrence Albright, the Chief Operating Officer of Apex Manufacturing. I had worked closely with Lawrence for 3 years, helping his company navigate complex federal compliance audits. I did not want to leave him in a difficult position, But over the next few months, the atmosphere at Oak Ridge became toxic. Peter Vance began writing formal warnings about my lack of participation in office culture. He called me into his office and told me that several team members felt I was not a team player because I did not join their weekly social gatherings. I told him my work was completed ahead of schedule and that I saved the firm 3 major clients. He replied that technical competence was secondary to team synergy. That was when I realized the end was near, and I began preparing my departure. I just did not expect they would hand me the perfect exit on a silver platter. The morning after the conference room execution was a Friday. I arrived at the office at 6 o'clock, long before the security guards had finished their first rounds. The building was dark and quiet, a peaceful contrast to the chaotic theater of the previous afternoon. I did not log on to the Oak Ridge network. Instead, I began clearing out my desk. I packed my personal notebook, my coffee mug, and a few reference manuals into a cardboard box. I paused at my desk for a brief moment, looking at the plastic nameplate that had sat on my partition for 4 years. It was cracked at the edge, a cheap piece of plastic that they had not bothered to replace during the office renovations. I threw it in the trash bin. I did not want any physical souvenirs of my time here. As I packed my books, 2 thick volumes on enterprise systems engineering and a manual on federal data privacy compliance, I could hear the city waking up outside the window. A delivery truck hissed as its brakes engaged on the street below. As I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, I looked at a row of green folders. These were my personal journals and notes. For 4 years, I had kept detailed records of every client interaction, every database structure I designed, and every preference of the key executives we served. I had documented their technical pain points, their preferred reporting schedules, and the specific database issues we had resolved for them. I had kept these records because I believed that client service was built on details, not buzzwords. I knew that Lawrence Albright preferred receiving technical reports as plain text files because he read them on a tablet during his commute. I knew that the chief operating officer at Pinecrest Logistics had a habit of checking database synchronization at 6 o'clock every morning, and that a delay of even 10 minutes would cause him to call our office in a panic. I had documented these things in my handwriting, filling 3 black notebook journals and 12 green file folders over the years. These notes were not company property. They were my personal work journals, written by hand on my own time. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page, ensuring I had a digital record of the relationships I had built. I then packed the folders into my box. By 7 o'clock, I had walked out of the building for the last time. The weekend was quiet. I spent it reading, drinking good coffee, and watching the rain fall over the city. I felt no anxiety, only a deep sense of relief. On Monday morning, I arrived at the downtown office of Vanguard Partners. The building was a modern glass skyscraper that rose 60 stories above the city. The lobby was quiet, with a security desk made of polished black granite. Beverly Cross met me in the lobby with a warm smile and a coffee cup in her hand. We took the elevator up, our ears popping slightly as we rose to the 15th floor. The office was bright and open, filled with natural light and the hum of productive activity. She led me to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. "This is your space, Donald," Beverly said, smiling. "Your assistant is already setting up your calendar, and your team of 4 senior analysts will be ready for a briefing at 10 o'clock. We have also finalized the plans for our new regional office. We have secured a space 3 blocks from Oak Ridge Advisory. We want you to lead our expansion into their market, targeting the clients you know best." I sat behind my new desk, feeling a sensation I hadn't felt in years: excitement. I was no longer a hidden mechanic. I was a senior leader with the resources to do my job properly. At 10 o'clock, I met my new team of 4 analysts. They were bright, respectful, and highly competent. I shared the digital notes I had compiled over the past 4 years, outlining the specific technical challenges faced by Oak Ridge's major clients. We began building transition plans, preparing for the moment those clients realized I was no longer managing their accounts. The reaction from Oak Ridge's clients was immediate. On Tuesday morning, my personal phone rang. It was Lawrence Albright, the Chief Operating Officer of Apex Manufacturing. "Donald," he said, his voice filled with frustration, I just heard you left Oak Ridge Advisory. They had a minor database synchronization failure this morning, and Peter Vance spent an hour on the phone with me trying to explain it. He did not make any sense, and he could not fix it. We cannot afford this kind of downtime. Where are you working now? I told Lawrence that I had joined Vanguard Partners as the Senior Director of Client Relations, and that we were opening a new office just 3 blocks from his headquarters. I explained that my new team was fully capable of managing his database architecture and ensuring complete systems compliance. Lawrence did not hesitate. Donald, we have worked together for 3 years, and you are the only reason our compliance audits are clean. I do not care about Oak Ridge. I care about results. Can we schedule a meeting to discuss transferring our account to Vanguard? I told him I was available on Thursday afternoon. By the time I hung up, I had 3 more messages from other major Oak Ridge clients, including the director of Pinecrest Logistics and the vice president of Silverton Holdings. They were all experiencing database delays and were eager to schedule discussions. The word was out. The engine that kept Oak Ridge running had moved, and the clients were ready to follow. Our meeting with Lawrence Albright on Thursday afternoon took place in our temporary conference room on the 15th floor. Lawrence arrived with his chief financial officer. He did not want a presentation, and he did not want to hear buzzwords. He wanted to know how Vanguard Partners would manage his data migration. I introduced him to my team of 4 analysts. They immediately pulled out their tablets and displayed a migration timeline that was customized for Apex Manufacturing's database structure. I explained that we would migrate their tables in 3 separate phases, starting at midnight on Saturday to minimize any disruption to their operations. We had identified the exact bottleneck that had caused Peter Vance so much trouble and had already built a sandbox testing environment to verify the new integration. Lawrence listened in silence, nodding slowly. When I finished, he looked at his chief financial officer. "This is what a professional team looks like," Lawrence said. He signed the agreement, which was worth exactly $1,200,000 annually, covering all their systems validation and compliance auditing. By the end of my 2nd week at Vanguard, the directors of Pinecrest Logistics and Silverton Holdings had also signed contracts with us, representing another $2 million in annual revenue. The transition of Silverton Holdings was particularly challenging because they used a legacy system that was over 10 years old, and my analysts spent 2 full nights refactoring their migration scripts to prevent any data loss. The client was so impressed by our diligence that they sent a personal letter of appreciation to Beverly Cross, praising our team's technical focus. They valued the direct communication and the thorough technical expertise we brought to the table, noting that it was a refreshing change from the empty sales pitches they had received from our competitors. This success demonstrated to the Vanguard executives that our new division was worth every dollar of investment. In total, 7 of Oak Ridge Advisory's major clients chose not to renew their agreements, transferring their business to Vanguard. These 7 accounts represented 60% of Oak Ridge's annual revenue. I had not solicited them. They had reached out to me because they valued the reliability I had provided for years. Our analysts worked late to ensure that not a single database packet was dropped during the migrations. We delivered every initial compliance report ahead of schedule, and our clients noticed the difference immediately. The revenue of these 7 accounts shifted the balance of power in our local market. On Friday afternoon, my desk phone rang. The caller identification displayed Peter Vance's direct line. I picked up the receiver. "Donald," Peter screamed, his voice cracking with rage. "What do you think you are doing? This is corporate sabotage. You are stealing our clients and you are violating the non-compete agreement you signed when you joined this firm. Our legal team is preparing a lawsuit and we will ruin your career." I kept my voice calm and steady. "Peter," I said, "I suggest you have your legal team review my original employment contract. I signed a standard non-disclosure agreement regarding proprietary internal methodologies, but I never signed a non-compete. Redwood Consulting did not require non-compete agreements for analyst-level employees, and Oak Ridge did not update our contracts after the merger. Furthermore, I did not solicit these clients. They contacted me because your team could not maintain their database systems. I did not share any of your internal documents or methodologies. I simply offered them a team that could perform the work. Donald, please. Peter's tone suddenly shifted from anger to desperation. We can work this out. I can offer you a promotion to director, a significant raise in your own department. We can wipe the slate clean. Peter, I replied, 2 weeks ago, you sat in a conference room and watched Beatrice Cole read a list of 190 reasons why I was unfit to work at your company. I am simply acting in accordance with your assessment. I hung up the phone. The threat of a lawsuit was not empty. 3 days later, a process server arrived at my new office and handed me a summons. Oak Ridge Advisory had filed a complaint in the state court, seeking an emergency injunction to block me from working with their former clients and demanding the return of what they called trade secrets. The lawsuit alleged that I had signed a non-compete agreement during the merger and attached a copy of a document containing my signature. I looked at the document and felt a cold shiver of anger. The signature on the non-compete was mine, but I knew with absolute certainty that I had never signed such an agreement. I immediately called Julian Forbes, a senior contract attorney who had worked with Vanguard for over a decade. Julian came to my office, reviewed the filing, and looked closely at the attached document under a magnifying glass. Donald, Julian said, adjusting his glasses, this is a very serious allegation, but the document looks suspicious. The formatting of the signature page does not match the rest of the agreement, and the date next to your signature is backdated to the week of the merger. We need to hire a forensic document examiner immediately. If they have fabricated this document to block your employment, they have committed a major violation. We will face them in court on Tuesday morning. The courtroom was quiet on Tuesday morning. Peter Vance sat at the plaintiff table alongside 2 outside corporate attorneys. He avoided my gaze, staring intently at his tablet. I sat next to Julian Forbes, feeling completely calm. The judge, a serious woman with silver hair, called the hearing to order and asked Oak Ridge's counsel to present their case. The lead attorney for Oak Ridge stood up and argued passionately that I had breached my employment obligations, taken proprietary client data, and violated a valid non-compete agreement. He presented the signed agreement as their primary evidence, claiming it was signed by me during the merger 4 years ago. He argued that my actions were causing irreparable harm to Oak Ridge, as 60% of their clients had left the firm. When it was our turn, Julian Forbes stood up. Your Honor, he said, my client has indeed helped these companies transition their business, but he did so without soliciting them and without violating any valid agreement. In fact, the non-compete agreement presented by the plaintiff is a complete fabrication. Julian then presented a report from a certified forensic document examiner. The analysis showed that the signature on the non-compete agreement had been digitally copied from a performance review I had signed 3 years ago and pasted onto a document that was created only 2 weeks ago. The digital metadata of the file revealed that the document was created on a computer registered to Peter Vance just days after I resigned. The examiner had matched the exact angle of the pen strokes, the tiny micro splashes of ink, and the alignment of the letters. They were identical to the pixel. This is a clear violation of California Penal Code Section 470, Julian declared, his voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. The plaintiff has forged my client's signature and presented a fraudulent document to this court in an attempt to enforce an invalid contract. This conduct is not only a fraud on my client, it is a fraud on this court. The agreement is void ab initio, and we request that the motion for an injunction be denied. The judge's expression turned ice cold. She looked at Oak Ridge's attorneys and demanded an explanation. The lawyers stammered, claiming they had received the document from their client and had no knowledge of any fabrication. The judge did not hide her anger. She denied the motion for an injunction immediately. She stated that she was referring the matter to the state attorney for a formal investigation into the forgery, noting that presenting a fraudulent document to a court carried severe criminal penalties. She warned Peter Vance that he would likely need his own criminal defense counsel, as forging a document to influence a civil proceeding was a serious offense under California Penal Code. Section 470. Peter Vance's face was completely drained of color as he walked out of the courtroom, his hands trembling as his attorneys whispered to him frantically, advising him to remain silent. The legal threat was gone, destroyed by his own desperate attempt to cover his failures. I walked out of the courthouse with Julian, stepping into the warm morning sunlight. We walked to a nearby coffee shop to celebrate our victory. It was a wonderful feeling of vindication, and it showed me that honesty and preparation are the best legal tools a person can have in the face of corporate bullying. 2 months later, the new Vanguard Partners regional office opened. It was a beautiful space located on the third floor of a brick building, just 3 blocks from Oak Ridge Advisory. The sign in the window facing the street read, Vanguard Partners Regional Office. Donald Cooper, Senior Director of Client Relations. On our first morning in the new space, I stood by the window, watching the street. I saw Peter Vance walk past on his way to work. He stopped, stared at our sign for a long minute, and then looked down at the pavement. Oak Ridge Advisory was collapsing. With 60% of their revenue gone, they had been forced to lay off 8 analysts, downsize their office space, and cancel all executive bonuses. Beatrice Cole had resigned a week earlier, and Peter had been demoted from his management position while the criminal investigation proceeded. Our new office, meanwhile, was thriving. We had already hired 3 new analysts to handle our growing client load, and Lawrence Albright was regularly recommending our services to other executives in the manufacturing sector. As I watched the traffic move down the street, I reflected on the events of the past few months. I realized that the real revenge was not the court victory or the collapse of Oak Ridge Advisory. The real revenge was building a workplace where technical competence was valued, where loyalty was returned, and where my name was finally on the sign. I had spent years being the invisible backbone of a failing firm, but I had finally built something that would last. If you are currently working in the shadows, keeping a company alive while others take the credit, I want you to remember my story. Do not assume your loyalty will be rewarded. Start documenting your contributions, protect your relationships, and never let incompetent managers convince you that your skills are not valuable. Because in the end, the builders are the ones who hold the cards, and it is only a matter of time before the systems they manage catch up to their value.